My wife said the baby was mine. The DNA test said otherwise. The marriage I believed in. For most of my adult life, I believed I was one of the lucky ones. Not because my life was perfect, but because it felt real. My wife, Laura, and I had been married for 9 years. We weren't flashy. We weren't the couple posting matching outfits or dramatic anniversary captions. We were quieter than that. Steadier. The kind of marriage people described as solid. We met in our mid-20s, both carrying our own scars. She had come out of a chaotic relationship. I had spent years focusing on work instead of people. When we found each other, it felt like balance. She used to say, "With you, I can finally breathe." I used to reply, "With you, I finally feel chosen." We built our life slowly. A small apartment. Weekend routines. Shared jokes that only made sense to us. We argued, but never screamed. We disagreed, but never disrespected. At least, that's what I believed. The pregnancy. When Laura told me she was pregnant, it wasn't dramatic. No camera. No surprise box. No tears at first. She simply sat beside me on the couch one evening, placed my hand on her stomach, and said softly, "I think we are going to be parents." I froze. Then everything inside me broke open. I laughed. I cried. I held her so tightly she told me to breathe. For years, we had talked about children someday. Suddenly, someday was real. I remember whispering, "I'll do everything right." She smiled. "I know." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of cribs, names, first steps, school bags. I imagined teaching my child how to ride a bike, helping with homework, being better than my own father had been. For the first time in my life, the future felt tangible. Trust without question. People talk a lot about trust, but they rarely explain what it actually looks like. Trust isn't blind faith. Trust is not checking when you easily could. Laura said the baby was mine. I never questioned it. Why would I? We were married. We shared everything. We had built a life on honesty. At least, that's what I thought. She held my hand during doctor visits. She complained about nausea. She laughed about cravings. I painted the nursery myself while she watched from the doorway, teasing me for being too perfectionist. Sometimes, she looked distant. But pregnancy does that, I told myself. Sometimes, she guarded her phone. Everyone does, I told myself. Sometimes, she avoided certain conversations. Stress, I told myself. That's how lies survive, not because they're convincing, but because love fills in the gaps. The first crack that I ignored. One afternoon, during a routine checkup, the doctor asked a simple question. Based on conception timing, when do you believe pregnancy occurred? I answered confidently. Laura answered half a second later, with a different date. It was subtle. So subtle that no one reacted. No one except me. Our eyes met for a split second. Then she looked away. That moment stayed with me longer than it should have. But I buried it. Because love doesn't want answers, it wants peace. What I didn't know was that my life had already split into two timelines. The life I believed I was living. The truth waiting patiently to destroy it. And the DNA test was already on its way. The red flags I explained away. The changes I didn't want to name. Pregnancy didn't just change Laura's body. It changed the air between us. At first, it was subtle. So subtle that I felt guilty even noticing it. She stopped touching me the way she used to. Not just physically, but emotionally. Conversations became shorter. Eye contact became rarer. Silences became longer. When I asked how she was feeling, she said, "Tired." When I offered help, she said, "I'm fine." When I tried to talk about us, she said, "You're overthinking." So I stopped asking. Because men like me are taught something early in life. Don't create problems where there are none. The phone that never left her hand. Before the pregnancy, Laura never cared much about her phone. After, it became an extension of her body. She took it into the bathroom. She tilted the screen away from me. She smiled at messages, but not at me. Once, while we were watching TV, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and smiled. I asked casually, "Who's that?" She replied too fast, "Just work." I nodded. I told myself, she's pregnant. She's emotional. She's allowed privacy. What I didn't tell myself was the truth. My instincts were screaming, and I was silencing them. Doctor visits without me. At first, I went to every appointment. I held her hand during ultrasounds. I listened to heartbeats that made my chest ache with pride. Then, one day, she said, "You don't have to come this time." I laughed. "Of course I do. It's my kid." She stiffened, just for a moment. Then she smiled and said, "I just don't want you missing work." I believed her. The next appointment, same excuse. Then another. Eventually, she stopped asking at all. And I didn't push. Because pushing felt like mistrust. The joke that wasn't a joke. At a small family dinner, my sister leaned over the crib photos and said, "He doesn't really look like you, does he?" Everyone laughed. I laughed too. Laura didn't. Her fork froze midair. Then she forced a smile and said, "He'll change." That night, she snapped at me for no reason. "You should tell your family to stop making stupid comments." I apologized for something I hadn't done. The distance in bed. By the third trimester, intimacy was gone completely. I understood the physical reasons. I respected her boundaries. But emotional closeness vanished too. She turned away when she slept. She flinched when I touched her hair. She sighed when I kissed her forehead. One night, I asked quietly, "Did I do something wrong?" She stared at the ceiling and said, "Why do you always need reassurance?" That sentence hurt more than anger ever could. The timeline that didn't add up. There was a moment, small, technical, easy to miss. But it mattered. We were organizing old photos for the baby book. I pointed to a picture from a work conference she attended months ago and said, "That was around the time we conceived, right?" She hesitated, then said, "Yeah, around then." But I remembered that month clearly. I had been traveling, gone, for nearly 3 weeks. The room felt colder. But instead of asking the obvious question, I laughed and said, "Pregnancy brain, right?" She smiled. Relief flashed across her face. That should have terrified me. Why I didn't confront her. People always ask later, "Why didn't you say something sooner?" Because confrontation risks answers, and answers risk destruction. At that time, I still believed love meant protecting the illusion. I told myself, I was being paranoid. I was being insecure. I was being unfair. But deep down, another voice whispered, "You already know. You're just not ready to hear it." The birth approaches. As the due date came closer, Laura became anxious. Not excited anxious. Fearful anxious. She double-checked paperwork. She insisted on handling documents herself. She avoided conversations about birth certificates. Once, she said suddenly, "Do you think blood really matters? In family?" The question came out of nowhere. I replied without thinking, "Of course not. Love is what matters." She exhaled deeply, as if I had just given the right answer to a test I didn't know I was taking. What I still didn't know. I thought the hardest part of this journey would be becoming a father. I was wrong. The hardest part was becoming a man who had to face the truth, after building his entire identity on a lie. And the truth was almost ready to be born. The birth, the bond, and the first real doubt. The day everything changed. Labor started at 3:17 a.m. Laura shook me awake, her face pale, her voice tight. "It's time." I jumped out of bed like my body had been waiting for this moment my entire life. I grabbed the hospital bag, keys, phone, everything except fear. Fear didn't belong in that moment. In the car, she stared out the window silently. No jokes, no nervous laughter, just shallow breathing and clenched fists. I reached for her hand. She hesitated, then took it. That hesitation, barely a second long, stayed with me longer than the drive itself. The delivery room. Hours blurred together. Doctors, nurses, machines beeping. Sweat, tears. I stood beside her, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, promising things I didn't even fully understand yet. "You're doing amazing. I'm here. You're not alone." She looked at me once, really looked at me, and her eyes filled with something. That wasn't pain. It was fear. Raw, naked, almost desperate. And then the baby cried. A sharp, piercing sound that cut through everything. The nurse lifted him up. A healthy baby boy. My knees nearly gave out. I laughed. I cried. I felt my chest swell with something so powerful it scared me. They placed him in my arms. He was warm, small, fragile. He wrapped his tiny fingers around mine. And in that instant, nothing else mattered. Not doubt, not fear, not logic. I was his father. Or so I believed. The first look that shook me. It happened quietly, almost cruelly subtle. A nurse leaned over and said, smiling, "He has a lot of hair already." Another nurse added, "And those eyes, wow." I looked down. Dark hair, dark eyes. Laura had dark features. I didn't. I told myself genetics are unpredictable. Then someone said it. Not maliciously, not loudly, just honestly. "He doesn't really look like you." I laughed. Too fast. Laura didn't laugh at all. She turned her face away. The paperwork. Later, when they brought the forms, the birth certificate, the name registration, Laura suddenly insisted on filling them out herself. "I'm too tired," she said when I offered to help. I watched her hand shake as she wrote. When it came time to list the father's name, she paused. Just for a moment. Then wrote mine. That pause burned itself into my memory. The first night. That night, the hospital room was quiet. Machines hummed softly. The baby slept between us. Laura stared at the ceiling. I stared at him. Every breath he took felt like a promise I didn't know how to keep. I whispered, "I'll protect you." Laura turned sharply. "Don't say things like that." Her voice wasn't angry. It was afraid. Going home. At home, life changed instantly. Sleepless nights. Diapers. Feedings. Crying. I was exhausted, but happy. I took time off work. I learned how to hold him, how to calm him, how to rock him just right so he'd fall asleep on my chest. He liked my heartbeat. That meant something to me. But slowly, the comments started. From friends. From family. From strangers. "He doesn't look like you. He has different features. Are you sure he's yours?" Always said jokingly. Always laughed off. Always left behind like a stain you pretend not to see. The doctor's comment. At his 2-month checkup, the pediatrician reviewed family history. Any genetic conditions on the father's side? She asked. I answered confidently. She nodded, then hesitated. "There's a marker here that's uncommon based on what you've shared." Laura interrupted. "He probably got it from my side." The doctor looked unconvinced, but said nothing. Neither did I. But that night, I Googled. And what I read didn't make sense. The bond that made it worse. Here's the cruel part no one tells you. The stronger my bond with him became, the louder the doubt grew. He smiled when he saw me, calmed down when I held him, fell asleep on my chest every night. I loved him, deeply, and loving him made the possibility unbearable. Because if the doubt was true, then what was I? The question I was afraid to ask. One night, while Laura was showering, I stood alone in the nursery. I looked at his face under the soft yellow light, and for the first time, I whispered the question out loud. "Are you mine?" The room didn't answer, but my silence did. What was coming next? I still hadn't decided to test. I still hadn't confronted Laura, but something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer living in ignorance. I was living in suspicion, and suspicion doesn't fade. It waits. The DNA test and the moment my world collapsed. The decision I didn't want to make. There is a moment in every man's life when ignorance stops being comfort and starts becoming cowardice. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday night. Laura was asleep on the couch, the baby on her chest, both breathing softly. I stood in the doorway watching them, what looked like a perfect picture of family. And all I could think was, if I don't find out now, I'll never survive later. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel betrayed. I felt trapped inside a question that refused to die. So I ordered the DNA test. Online. Quietly. Without telling anyone. When the package arrived 3 days later, my hand shook for the first time. Collecting the samples. I told myself I was doing it just for peace of mind. That lie tasted bitter. The kit sat in my desk drawer for hours before I opened it. The instructions were simple. Too simple for something that could destroy a life. I swabbed my cheek. Easy. Then came the baby. I waited until Laura went out to buy groceries. I told myself I was a monster for even thinking this. But I did it anyway. He looked at me while I gently swabbed his cheek, curious, trusting, innocent. I had to look away. I sealed the envelope like I was sealing a coffin. The waiting. The company said results would arrive in 10 to 14 days. Those were the longest days of my life. Every laugh from Laura felt staged. Every kiss felt borrowed. Every time she said, "our son," my stomach twisted. I became hyper-aware of everything. The way she avoided certain topics. The way she watched my reactions. The way she asked casually, "You're happy, right?" I lied. Yes. The email. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Subject line. "Your DNA results are ready." I didn't open it immediately. I sat at my desk for nearly an hour, staring at the screen. My heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I told myself, once you open this, there's no going back. I clicked. 0%. The report was clinical. Cold. Precise. Probability of paternity. 0%. No room for interpretation. No margin for error. No hope. I read it again. And again. I waited for tears. They didn't come. Instead, something inside me went completely quiet. The sound of a lie breaking. I don't remember how long I sat there. Minutes. Hours. The world didn't end dramatically. It didn't explode. It just continued. Cars outside. A clock ticking. My phone buzzing with a text from Laura. "Did you want anything from the store?" I stared at that message and realized something horrifying. She had been living with this truth every day. And I had been living a lie she handed me with a smile. The confrontation. That night, after the baby was asleep, I placed the printed report on the kitchen table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply said, "Explain this." Laura looked at the paper, then at me. Her face drained of color. For a moment, she tried to pretend she didn't understand. Then her shoulders collapsed. She sat down. And she cried. Not the kind of crying that says this isn't true. The kind that says I've been caught. The confession. "It was a mistake," she said through tears. "It didn't mean anything. A coworker. A few months. One time turned into more. She said she ended it. She said she chose me. She said she was scared. Then she said the sentence that split my soul in half. I knew you'd be a better father than him." I stared at her. "You took my choice," I said quietly. She reached for me. I stepped back. The baby crying upstairs. As she begged, the baby started crying upstairs. That sound, his sound, ripped through me harder than the truth ever could. Laura looked at me desperately. "He's still your son," she said. I finally lost my calm. "No," I said. "He's your son. I was your lie." The night I didn't sleep. I didn't leave that night. I sat in the nursery until dawn, watching him sleep. Every memory replayed itself with new meaning. Every smile. Every promise. Every word mine. I loved him. And that made everything worse. What came next? The truth was out. But the real battle hadn't even begun. Because now I had to answer a question no one prepares you for. Do you stay for love? Or leave for truth? The fallout. Love. Law. And the slow collapse of a man. The morning after truth. Morning came like an insult. Sunlight through the curtains. Birds outside. The world pretending nothing had happened. Laura slept in the bedroom. I slept on the nursery floor. When the baby woke up, I pick him up automatically. Muscle memory. Instinct. Love without permission. He smiled at me. That smile almost destroyed me, because now every loving act felt like betrayal to myself. The conversation that changed everything. Later that day, Laura sat across from me at the kitchen table. She looked smaller, older, broken. "I'll do anything," she said. "Therapy, counseling. I'll cut everyone off." I asked her one question. "When were you going to tell me?" She looked down. "I don't know." That was my answer. Not never. Not soon. Just, "I don't know," which meant she was willing to let me live a lie for the rest of my life. Learning the legal truth. I met a lawyer 2 days later. I didn't tell Laura. The lawyer was calm, professional, emotionless. He explained things slowly. Because my name was on the birth certificate. Because I had acted as the father. Because time had passed. I could be legally responsible for child support, even if the child wasn't biologically mine. Blood mattered emotionally. The law didn't care. I walked out of that office feeling like I was drowning. The war inside my head. Every night became a battle. If I stayed, I'd be raising another man's child. I'd be tied forever to a woman who lied to me. I'd resent them both. If I left, I'd abandon a child who loved me. I'd be judged by everyone. I'd live with guilt forever. There was no version where I won. Only versions where I survived. The question no one could answer. I talked to everyone. My parents, her parents, friends, a therapist. Everyone said something different. Blood doesn't matter. He's innocent. You'll regret leaving. You'll regret staying. No one could tell me how to live with myself, because no one else had to. The moment I realized love isn't enough. One night, Laura held the baby and said softly, "Look how much he loves you." Something snapped inside me. "Love without truth is manipulation," I replied. She cried. I didn't comfort her. For the first time in my life, I chose honesty over harmony. Preparing to leave. I didn't pack immediately. I spent days walking through the house, touching walls, photos, furniture. Memories felt poisonous now. I wrote letters I never gave. To the baby. To Laura. To myself. I realized something painful. Staying wouldn't make me noble. It would make me disappear. The decision. I told Laura calmly, "I'm filing for divorce." She collapsed. Screaming. Begging. Promising. Then anger. "You're punishing an innocent child." I answered quietly, "No, you did that when you lied." That was the moment she understood I wasn't coming back. The last night. My final night in the house was silent. I stood in the nursery one last time. I held him. He slept peacefully. I whispered, "I'm sorry I wasn't given the truth." Then I put him down and walked away. What was waiting outside? I thought leaving would hurt the most. I was wrong. The worst pain came after. When the world found out. Divorce, public judgment, and the loneliness that followed. When the story was no longer mine. I didn't announce the divorce. I didn't post anything. I didn't explain myself. But Laura did. Not directly. Not honestly. She cried to her parents. She confided in friends. She told her version. By the time I realized what was happening, the story had already escaped me. I was no longer a man who had been lied to. I was the man who abandoned a baby. The first accusation. It came from her mother. She called me one afternoon, voice shaking with rage. "How could you do this?" She demanded. "He called you Dad." I tried to explain. She cut me off. Real men don't run. The call ended. I sat there holding my phone, wondering when honesty became cowardice. Friends choosing sides. Some friends stopped calling. Others called just to judge. One said, "I get why you're hurt, but this feels extreme." Another said, "If you can walk away from a child, what does that say about you?" No one asked what it felt like to be deceived. No one asked what it did to my identity. They just needed someone to blame. And I was convenient. The courtroom reality. Divorce wasn't dramatic. It was sterile. Paperwork. Dates. Deadlines. Laura cried in court. I didn't. That made me look cold. The judge barely looked at me. Because the truth didn't matter. Only optics. I signed away parental rights. It felt like amputating a part of myself. But leaving it would have killed me slowly. The empty apartment. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment. No photos. No noise. No reminders. At night, the silence screamed. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., expecting to hear crying. There was none. That was worse. The guilt that followed me. Guilt doesn't ask permission. It shows up everywhere. In grocery stores. At parks. At family gatherings. Every time I saw a child, my chest tightened. I questioned myself constantly. Did I do the right thing? Was I selfish? Was I weak? There were days I hated myself more than I hated Laura. What therapy taught me? Therapy didn't give me peace. It gave me clarity. My therapist said something that stayed with me. You didn't leave a child. You left a lie that threatened to consume you. I didn't feel healed, but I felt understood. For the first time since the truth came out. The message I didn't expect. Months later, I received a message. From the man Laura had cheated with. He had found out. He wanted to talk. I stared at the screen for a long time. The past wasn't done with me yet. Where this was going. I thought the worst was behind me. I was wrong. Because the next phase wasn't about pain. It was about reckoning. The powerful, mature ending. Closure and lasting lessons. The house that wasn't mine. Years have passed. I walked past the apartment building where Laura and the baby lived one afternoon. The windows gleamed in the sunlight. The laughter inside, muffled but certain, reminded me of what I had lost. I did not feel envy. I did not feel anger. Only a quiet acknowledgement. That house, that life, was never mine. And pretending it was would have destroyed me entirely. The letters I never sent. Over the years, I wrote letters I never mailed. To the baby, words of love I could never give openly. To Laura, words of understanding I could never speak aloud. To myself, words of forgiveness, strength, and clarity. Each letter became a bridge between who I was and who I had become. A bridge I crossed slowly, carefully, without looking back. Lessons learned. Pain teaches differently than joy. I learned. That love is not ownership. That truth, no matter how cruel, is a gift. That betrayal does not define you. Your response does. That boundaries are as necessary as affection. And that letting go can be the ultimate act of courage. The world continues to judge. People still call me cold, selfish, or heartless. But I have come to realize, those who judge rarely know the cost of living honestly. A new life. I rebuilt my life carefully. A small apartment I could call mine. Friends who understood me without needing explanations. Work that fulfilled me. Love that was honest, patient, and mutual. I walk through life aware of impermanence. I hold love lightly, but deeply. I accept joy, but I prepare for sorrow. Because life does not pause for betrayal. And growth only comes through endurance. A moment of peace. Sometimes, at night, I sit alone and remember. The baby's smile. Laura's tearful confessions. The silence of that DNA report. And I smile softly. Not because I am happy about what happened, but because I survived. Because I chose truth over illusion. Because I chose myself without losing compassion. And in that choice, I found a freedom no betrayal could ever take away. The final reflection. If I could speak to my younger self, I would say, you will be broken. You will cry. You will doubt. But you will emerge stronger. You will find love again, real love, grounded in truth. You will survive betrayal and reclaim life in your own terms. And someday, you will forgive, not for them, but for yourself. Epilogue. Life's harsh beauty. Life is not fair. Love is not perfect. Truth can be cruel. But survival, honesty, and self-respect are victories no one can take away. I did not lose a child. I did not lose love. I reclaimed life. I reclaimed truth. I reclaimed myself. And that, in the end, is more than enough. I walked past the apartment building where Laura and the baby lived one afternoon. The windows gleamed in the sunlight. The laughter inside, muffled but certain, reminded me of what I had lost. I did not feel envy. I did not feel anger. Only a quiet acknowledgement. That house, that life, was never mine. And pretending it was would have destroyed me entirely. The letters I never sent. Over the years, I wrote letters I never mailed. To the baby, words of love I could never give openly. To Laura, words of understanding I could never speak aloud. To myself, words of forgiveness, strength, and clarity. Each letter became a bridge between who I was and who I had become. A bridge I crossed slowly, carefully, without looking back. Lessons learned. Pain teaches differently than joy. I learned. That love is not ownership. That truth, no matter how cruel, is a gift. That betrayal does not define you. Your response does. That boundaries are as necessary as affection. And that letting go can be the ultimate act of courage. The world continues to judge. People still call me cold, selfish, or heartless. But I have come to realize, those who judge rarely know the cost of living honestly. A new life. I rebuilt my life carefully. A small apartment I could call mine. Friends who understood me without needing explanations. Work that fulfilled me. Love that was honest, patient, and mutual. I walk through life aware of impermanence. I hold love lightly, but deeply. I accept joy, but I prepare for sorrow. Because life does not pause for betrayal. And growth only comes through endurance. A moment of peace. Sometimes, at night, I sit alone and remember. The baby's smile. Laura's tearful confessions. The silence of that DNA report. And I smile softly. Not because I am happy about what happened, but because I survived. Because I chose truth over illusion. Because I chose myself without losing compassion. And in that choice, I found a freedom no betrayal could ever take away. The final reflection. If I could speak to my younger self, I would say, you will be broken. You will cry. You will doubt. But you will emerge stronger. You will find love again, real love, grounded in truth. You will survive betrayal and reclaim life in your own terms. And someday, you will forgive, not for them, but for yourself. Epilogue. Life's harsh beauty. Life is not fair. Love is not perfect. Truth can be cruel. But survival, honesty, and self-respect are victories no one can take away. I did not lose a child. I did not lose love. I reclaimed life. I reclaimed truth. I reclaimed myself. And that, in the end, is more than enough.